Midnight in California. A huge crooked house rises out of the fog. Too many roofs, too many angles, too many windows staring into other windows like they're watching themselves. Stairs that climb and stop. Doors that open into walls. Hallways that loop back like a bad thought you can't shake. A maze built out of wood, glass, and obsession. This is the dark story of America's most cursed mansion, the Winchester House. From the outside, it almost looks like a fairy tale palace. Towers, porches, bright stained glass catching the moonlight. But inside, the logic breaks. Every corner feels wrong. Every step feels like you've stepped into someone else's nightmare. And every nail was hammered in by a woman who believed one thing with terrifying certainties. If she ever stopped building, she would die. Sarah Winchester, the widow of the man tied to the rifle that won the West. Her money came from a weapon that killed tens of thousands. Spiritualists told her the dead were hunting her, so she started building this house like a shield. Day and night. For 38 years. No master plan, only fear. Rooms sealed and never opened again. Passages servants refused to enter alone. Visitors who swore they heard footsteps in empty halls and voices calling their names. Was Sarah Winchester a madwoman trapped inside her own grief? Or did she know something about this house that we are still too afraid to believe? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house we should explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. The woman who disappeared into her own house. The workers knew something was wrong long before the newspapers did. Morning after morning, they walked through the gates of the estate in San Jose, California. They picked up their tools, checked their instructions when there were any, and started building. A new staircase, a new hallway, a new wing. And then, sometimes the next day, they tore it all down again. The job should have felt impossible. No blueprint, no final design, no clear goal. But the work was steady, and the pay arrived like clockwork. In the 1890s, that mattered more than sanity. America was wobbling through economic panic. Banks collapsed. Work vanished. Men with families lined up for jobs that didn't exist. But on the Winchester property, the hammers never stopped. The saws never went quiet. The estate didn't just offer employment, it offered survival. So they built. And still, they almost never saw the woman who owned it. Sarah Winchester stayed out of sight. She moved through the house like a rumor. A shadow. A presence you felt more than you witnessed. Workers, said instructions appeared on slips of paper, like messages delivered by the building itself. A servant would hand over an envelope. The foreman would read it once, frown, then tell the men what to do, without explanation. And what Sarah ordered was never normal. A door 7 feet high. A staircase with steps only 2 inches tall, as if the house was meant for someone who could barely lift their feet. A window built into the floor. Cabinets so shallow they couldn't hold anything. Chimneys that rose upward, and then stopped, like they forgot what they were supposed to be. The men didn't ask questions, because the checks cleared, because the meals were hot, because in a hard decade, this strange mansion paid better than any honest job in the valley. But they talked among themselves. Whispers passed through the scaffolding like cold wind. They said Sarah held séances at midnight in a hidden room, one with 13 hooks lined along the wall. They said She rang a bell at midnight to summon spirits, and rang it again at 2 a.m. to send them away. They said she believed the ghosts of everyone killed by Winchester rifles were hunting her, and the only way to survive was to confuse them, to keep them wandering, to keep them lost. So she built a maze. Not for humans, for the dead. Some workers decided she'd lost her mind. Others thought she was strangely brilliant. A few suspected she might be both, and then the house started to feel alive. Not in the movie sense. Not floating objects or screaming ghosts. Something quieter, more disturbing. A sense of intention in the wrongness. Hallways that doubled back like they were designed to erase your sense of direction. Doors that led nowhere like they were meant to waste your time. Rooms that felt colder than they should, even in summer, like they were holding something back. At its peak, the mansion swelled into an architectural fever dreams, 160 rooms, 40 staircases, 1,000 windows, 2,000 doors. Some doors opened into ordinary bedrooms, others opened into blank walls. One door on the second floor opened to nothing at all, just a straight drop into the garden below. 15 feet. Brick pavement. A mistake. Or a trap. Neighbors claimed they could hear hammering at all hours. Day crews under the sun, night crews under lamplight. A constant rhythm drifting over the orchards. Some said it sounded like a heartbeat. Inside the house. Servants described something even stranger. Sarah rarely slept. She wandered the hallways at night with a lantern, stopping at locks, testing doors, standing still in silence as if listening. Listening for what? They didn't know. Maybe for footsteps that weren't hers. Maybe for voices. Maybe for the kind of silence that feels like something is hiding inside it. And here's the truth that makes the whole story darker. Sarah wasn't some poor woman scraping together boards in desperation. She was one of the richest women on earth. When she inherited the Winchester fortune, it was the modern equivalent of hundreds of millions, money so endless she could build forever without blinking. And she did. For nearly 4 decades, the mansion grew and twisted and folded in on itself until even the men building it couldn't always remember the way back. A house that didn't feel like a home. A house that felt like a warning. To understand why she vanished into that maze, you have to go back. Back to Connecticut. Back to the rifle that built the empire. Back to the deaths that paid for every nail. The Winchester rifle didn't look like a curse. It looked like a tool. Wood stock, metal barrel. A simple lever under the trigger guard. Pull it down, push it back up, and the weapon fed itself the next round like it was hungry. In a world where most guns were still slow, single, shot, and clumsy, the Winchester felt almost impossible. Because it wasn't just a gun. It was a change in the rhythm of killing. Before repeating rifles, a man fired once, and then he had to stop. He had to reload. Powder. Ramrod. Breathing space. A pause where fear could creep in, and maybe mercy could exist. The Winchester erased that pause. It let you fire again and again. Fast enough that the enemy didn't feel like a person anymore. Just a target that kept moving until it didn't. And once that became possible, America didn't just adopt the rifle. America turned it into a myth. The marketing was ruthless, brilliant, almost poetic in its cruelty. The gun that won the West. Those words did something dangerous. They made violence sound like destiny. Posters showed cowboys on ridgelines, frontiersmen standing tall. It Winchester cradled like a symbol of freedom. It wasn't sold as a weapon. It was sold as an identity. If you owned one, you weren't just armed. You were part of the story. But here's what the posters didn't show. They didn't show what happens when you put rapid fire into a land already soaked in conflict. They didn't show the way Native American tribes faced repeating rifles in the hands of cavalry. They didn't show villages burned, bodies left where they fell, families erased, because the other side didn't have time to reload. They didn't show the bison. 60 million animals once thundered across the plains like a living ocean. Then, the market hunters arrived, men paid per hide, per bone, per tongue. The Winchester made the slaughter efficient. It turned a living world into piles of carcasses. It didn't do it alone, but it made it easy. And what's easy becomes popular. The rifle showed up everywhere. Civil War battlefields, range wars, outlaws and lawmen carrying the same gun, just pointing it at different people. Homesteads, railroad camps, frontier towns that weren't towns yet, just dirt streets and fear. Where the rifle went, bodies followed, and the company that made it, Winchester Repeating Arms, became an empire. By the 1860s, Oliver Winchester, the founder, was swimming in money while the country drowned in blood. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a cowboy. He was a businessman, and he understood something simple. If you can sell a faster way to win a fight, people will buy it. His son, William Wirt Winchester, inherited the business side of that empire, and in 1862, William married a young woman from a well-respected Connecticut family, Lockwood Pardee. Sarah was 23, small, barely 5 feet tall, dark hair, serious eyes, the kind of face people called gentle, the kind that made others lower their voices around her. She was educated, fluent in several languages, and known as an accomplished pianist. Shy, deeply religious, and then she married into a fortune built on a weapon. On paper, it was a dream. The Winchester home in New Haven was grand but tasteful. The kind of mansion that whispered old money, even when it was new money. Dinner parties, charity events, high society routines. The perfect life expected of a wealthy industrial family, trying to prove they belonged among the established elite. Sarah played her role. The quiet wife, the dignified daughter-in-law, the polished face in the drawing room. But the rifle was always there. Not physically, maybe, but in the air. In every chandelier hanging above their guests. In every servant's wage. In every silk dress and marble step. All of it paid for by the same machine, a tool designed to kill as efficiently as possible. Sarah never stood on a stage and condemned the Winchester rifle. There's no famous speech, no dramatic confession. But people close to her later hinted she carried discomfort, questions she asked, silences that lingered too long, a private struggle with the contradiction of living softly on money made violently. And then the funerals began. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester, a tiny baby, bright-eyed and fragile. Sarah poured everything into her. All the love she'd been holding back. All the hope she'd been saving for a future that might finally feel lighter than the past. Annie lived 6 weeks. Then she faded. The cause was recorded as marasmus, a wasting disease. The kind that looks like life simply draining away. Doctors couldn't fix it. Medicine in that era couldn't always explain it. Babies died. Families swallowed grief in silence, because grief was everywhere. But this wasn't everywhere. To Sarah, this was her world ending. She held her daughter as she disappeared, and something in Sarah collapsed with her. After Annie's death, Sarah withdrew. She stopped attending social events. Stopped playing piano. Friends said she barely spoke for months. When she did speak, it was like her voice had to push through fog. William tried to comfort her, but grief sits between people like a third body in the room. It changes everything. Their marriage didn't break in public. It didn't explode. It simply grew quiet. They never had another child. And then time did what time always does. It moved forward, whether the heart could follow or not. 15 years later, 1881, William got sick. Tuberculosis. A slow death. Not the kind you can fight. Not the kind you can bargain with. It just takes and takes until there's nothing left. He weakened day by day. Coughing. Blood. Weight loss. His body turning into a shadow inside the same grand house where they had once hosted laughter and music. Sarah nursed him herself. She watched him disappear the way she had watched Annie disappear. And when he finally died, Sarah was 43 years old. A widow. Childless. Alone in a mansion full of expensive silence. And now she was the sole heir to the Winchester fortune. The numbers were obscene for the time. She inherited around 20 million in 1881 money, plus a daily income from company profits that kept flowing like a river. In today's terms, that kind of wealth becomes almost impossible to picture. But here's the part most people miss. To Sarah, it wasn't just money. It was weight. Every dollar felt like it had fingerprints on it. Not her fingerprints, she didn't pull the trigger. But the rifle had made the fortune, and the fortune now belonged to her. And grief does something terrifying when you give it endless resources. It doesn't heal. It builds. It repeats. It obsesses. It looks for patterns and punishments and meaning. Because meaning is easier than randomness. Sarah didn't just lose her daughter. She lost her husband. And now she lived inside the mansion of the Winchester name, surrounded by reminders that her comfort came from death. And if you're the kind of person who is already religious, already sensitive, already wired to believe the universe has order, then grief starts to feel like judgment. Like maybe the tragedy isn't random. Maybe it's a bill being collected. Maybe something is coming for you next. This is the moment where Sarah's story turns. Because after William died, people noticed something about her. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't breathe right in rooms that felt too big. She began to act like someone listening for footsteps that weren't there. And when the living can't explain your pain, you start reaching for the dead. After William Winchester died, the house in New Haven didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Sarah lay awake night after night in rooms that were suddenly too large, too quiet, too full of echoes. The silence pressed in on her until every small sound became unbearable. A floorboard creak sounded like a footstep. Wind against the window felt like someone trying to get inside. Sleep came in fragments, minutes at a time. When she did drift off, she woke suddenly, heart racing, certain she'd heard her name spoken out loud. Her friends were worried. Her remaining family tried to help. They suggested rest, travel, prayer, a change of scenery. All the polite solutions people offer when they don't know what else to say. None of it touched the grief. Sarah wasn't just mourning. She was unraveling under questions that had no answers. Why her child? Why her husband? Why did everything she loved vanish while the money, the terrible, bloody money, kept multiplying without effort? She had been raised religious. She believed in God. But God was silent now. Church offered ritual, not explanation. Prayer offered comfort, but no clarity. So Sarah did what many people in her era did when traditional faith failed them. She turned to spiritualism. In the late 19th century, America was obsessed with the dead. Parlors across the country hosted séances. Tables were set with candles and flowers. Mediums promised voices from beyond the grave. Newspapers reported on spirit photography, automatic writing, ghostly apparitions captured on glass plates. This wasn't fringe belief. It was fashionable. Respected scientists attended séances. Writers defended them. Politicians quietly consulted mediums. The idea that death wasn't final, that the dead could speak, warn, guide, offered something intoxicating. Hope. For people shattered by loss, spiritualism didn't feel like madness. It felt like mercy. Sarah wanted answers. She wanted to know if Annie still existed somewhere. She wanted to know if William was at peace. And beneath all of that, she wanted to know something darker. Was she being punished? The exact details are blurred by time, rumor, and exaggeration, but nearly every version of the story agrees on one thing. Sarah went to a medium. Some accounts say it happened in Boston. Others insist it was New Haven. A few claim Sarah traveled quietly, unwilling to let her family know how far her grief had pushed her. Wherever it happened, the message she received was the same. And it changed everything. The medium told Sarah she was cursed, not cursed by God. Not cursed by fate. Cursed by the dead. By the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Native Americans driven from their land. Soldiers who never made it home. Settlers shot in disputes. Hunters, outlaws, lawmen, men, women, children, people who had died violently and left the world angry, unfinished, and restless. According to the medium, those spirits were not drifting aimlessly. They were focused. And they were coming for the Winchester family. The medium reportedly told Sarah that the spirits had already collected payment. First, her daughter. Then, her husband. And now, Sarah herself was next. Unless she acted. The solution was as strange as it was specific. Sarah had to leave New England. She had to move west, as far west as she could go. She had to buy a house. And she had to build. Not once. Not carefully. Not with a finished plan. She had to build constantly. Day and night. Without stopping. Because as long as the house remained unfinished, the spirits would be confused. Lost. Trapped wandering hallways that never ended. Chasing doors that led nowhere. The moment construction stopped, the medium said, the spirits would find her. And she would die. To someone hearing this today, it sounds like a scam. A cruel manipulation of a grieving widow with too much money and too much pain. But Sarah didn't hear it that way. She heard structure. A rule. A system. And grief clings to systems the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. Whether she believed every word literally, or whether she simply needed a reason to keep moving, the result was the same. She listened. And then she acted. In 1884, Sarah Winchester did something that shocked her family. She sold the New Haven mansion, packed her belongings, closed the door on the life she'd known. She didn't explain herself. She didn't argue. She didn't ask permission. She simply left. She boarded a train heading west, crossing farmland, prairie, mountains, and desert. Mile after mile of distance between herself and the graves of her husband and child. Between herself and the factories, offices, and boardrooms tied to the Winchester name. She traveled until America ran out of land. Until the map thinned. Until the air changed. California. In San Jose, surrounded by orchards and rolling fog, Sarah found a modest, unfinished farmhouse. 8 rooms. 2 stories. Nothing special. Just a wooden structure sitting quietly on 40 acres of fruit trees. She bought it. And then, without pause, hired carpenters. Construction began in 1886, and it never stopped. Not for weekends. Not for holidays. Not for illness. Not for earthquakes. Not for nearly 4 decades. What began as a simple farmhouse would become the impossible maze known today as the Winchester Mystery House, a structure built not to be lived in, but to be unfinished. A house designed not for comfort, but for survival. A house built to confuse the dead, and once the hammering began, Sarah never looked back. The hammering started at dawn. Carpenters arrived at the San Jose property and found instructions waiting, sometimes neatly sketched on brown paper, sometimes scribbled on scraps, sometimes delivered verbally through the foreman, with no drawings at all. Sometimes there was nothing. Just orders to tear down what they had finished yesterday and start again. This was not how houses were built. In the late 1800s, construction followed daylight. Labor was expensive. Materials were precious. Night work was dangerous, slow, and avoided whenever possible. But this house was different. Sarah Winchester did not care about efficiency. She cared about continuity. The building could never stop. Day crews worked under the California sun. When they packed up their tools at sunset, the night crew arrived with lanterns and oil lamps. Shadows stretched across half-finished walls. Sawdust floated through the air like smoke. The sound of hammering echoed through the orchards, while the rest of the valley slept. Neighbors said you could hear it at all hours. Some said the rhythm sounded like breathing. Others said it sounded like a heartbeat. Inside the gates, the work followed no logic anyone could understand. One week, the crews framed an entire bedroom, walls, windows, door trim. The next morning, the foreman delivered new instructions. Take it down. Move it 20 feet to the left. Rebuild it exactly the same. Another day, they constructed a staircase, 7 steps up, a small landing, then nothing. The stairs slammed directly into the ceiling. The workers stood there, tools in hand, waiting for clarification. None came. The staircase stayed. Doors were installed that opened into blank walls. Cabinets were built barely an inch deep, purely decorative, useless as storage. Chimneys rose upward for stories, and then stopped just short of the roof, venting into attics instead of open air. Windows appeared at floor level. Windows faced other windows. Some rooms had more doors than walls. None of it made sense, but the paychecks always arrived. Every Friday. In cash. On time. Sarah paid better than almost anyone else in the region. She didn't just pay wages, she fed the workers. Hot meals prepared by kitchen staff and carried out to scaffolding and work tables. Roasted meat, vegetables, fresh bread, coffee. In winter, soup. In summer, lemonade and fruit from the orchards. During the economic depressions of the 1890s, when other construction projects collapsed and families went hungry, this job didn't just offer money. It offered dignity. And so the men stayed. Sarah herself remained mostly unseen. Servants said she moved through the house at odd hours, inspecting work, leaving notes, changing plans. She rarely slept more than a few hours at a time. Much of the night, she walked the halls alone, lantern in hand. Listening to the house, as if it were speaking back to her. One worker later claimed he saw her through an unfinished window late one night. A small figure dressed entirely in black, standing still, staring at the walls as if reading instructions written there that no one else could see. The house grew fast. 8 rooms became 20. 20 became 40. Wings extended in directions that defied symmetry. Towers rose, gables multiplied. A grand ballroom appeared, then was sealed off and never used. A conservatory followed, fitted with stained glass imported from Europe. The craftsmanship was exquisite. No expense spared, and the oddities multiplied faster than the normal rooms. A door on the 2nd floor opened directly into empty air. No balcony, no railing, just a 15-foot drop onto brick pavement below. A staircase with 44 steps climbed barely 9 feet. Each step only 2 inches high. Walking it felt like ascending in slow motion, your body confused by the effort of going nowhere. Switchback hallways looped endlessly, turning back on themselves, so completely that visitors often found themselves standing where they'd started, convinced they'd walked much farther. Local newspapers began paying attention. They called it the Mystery House, a mansion where a reclusive widow kept crews working day and night on a project that made no sense to anyone outside the gates. Reporters tried to interview Sarah. She refused. Guards were hired. The gates stayed locked. The orchards formed a green wall between the road and the growing maze of turrets and roofs. But rumors don't respect fences. Stories leaked out anyway. About midnight bells. About rooms servants refused to clean alone. About footsteps heard in hallways that were supposed to be empty. And beneath all of it, one detail unsettled people the most. Sarah Winchester never explained herself. She never justified the expense. Never defended the design. Never corrected the rumors. She just kept building. And the longer it went on, the more the house felt less like a structure and more like a response, as if every wall was an answer to a question no one else could hear. As if the house wasn't meant to be understood, only continued, and somewhere deep inside the maze, hidden from daylight, a small room waited. A room the servants whispered about. A room Sarah visited every night. The place where the instructions were said to come from. Deep inside the maze, far from windows and outside walls, there was a room the servants spoke about in lowered voices. They didn't give tours of it. They didn't linger near it. They didn't enter it unless they absolutely had to. They called it the séance room. To reach it, you had to know the path. Not a straight path. There were no straight paths in the Winchester house, but a very specific sequence of turns. Down a narrow hallway. Past what looked like an ordinary cabinet that opened into a hidden passage. Through a corridor, barely wide enough for one person, no windows, no drafts, no sound from the outside world. The room itself was small, unremarkable at first glance. No grand decoration, no stained glass, no towering ceilings. And that was what made it unsettling. It felt intentionally hidden. No exterior walls touched it. No natural light ever reached it. You could stand inside at noon and feel like it was midnight. Along one wall were 13 hooks, iron, evenly spaced, identical. Nothing ever hung from them. No coats, no tools. No rope, just 13 empty hooks, fixed there, as if waiting. The room had one entrance, but 3 exits. One door led back the way you came. Another opened into a completely different hallway, one that could take you to an entirely separate part of the house. The third door was the most dangerous. It opened into a false passage. A step forward would send you dropping 8 feet down into a storage room below. No railing. No warning. Just a door that looked real until it wasn't. Servants learned quickly not to touch that door. In the center of the room stood a cabinet. Inside, Sarah reportedly kept robes and personal items used during her nighttime rituals. What exactly those items were, no one ever said. Some servants claimed they never looked closely. Others said there was nothing unusual at all, just cloth and empty space. Above the room ran a bell system. 2 bells. One rang at midnight. The other rang at 2 in the morning. The servants understood the routine, even if they didn't understand the reason. At midnight, the first bell rang. That was when Sarah entered the séance room. At 2 a.m., the second bell rang. That was when she left. Or, depending on which version of the story you believe, that was when the spirits were sent away. No one ever witnessed the séances themselves. Sarah never allowed anyone inside while she was there. Not servants. Not workers. Not family. But the house was old, and sound traveled strangely through its corridors. Workers who stayed late claimed they heard footsteps afterward. Soft, deliberate movements echoing through hallways that should have been empty. Some said they heard Sarah's voice. Quiet. Measured, as if she was speaking to someone standing very close to her. But there was never a reply. At least, none they could hear. One housekeeper later said Sarah sometimes spent hours alone in that room, sitting in total darkness, saying nothing at all. Another claimed she lit candles that burned strange colors, though whether that was chemistry, reflection, or imagination no one could say. What mattered was this: after nights in the séance room, the house changed. Rooms that had been finished the week before were suddenly sealed off. Doors nailed shut. Furniture removed. Entire wings closed as if something had happened there, something Sarah wanted contained. Other nights, new construction orders appeared. Add a hallway. Remove a window. Build a staircase here. Block a door there. The house responded to the nights. That connection is documented. What isn't documented is why. Did Sarah believe she was receiving instructions from the dead, or was the séance room simply the place where she went to be alone with her grief, where she could cry, pray, argue with God, or sit in silence without servants watching? There are no diaries, no journals, no written explanations. Sarah left no roadmap to her mind. But we know the room was real. It still exists. Visitors can walk through it today, though the hooks are gone and the bell system disconnected. The space feels smaller than people expect. Less theatrical, less cinematic, which somehow makes it worse. Because it feels functional, intentional, as if it was never meant to impress anyone, only to serve a purpose. And the purpose, whatever it was, kept the house growing. The workers learned not to ask questions. They learned to follow new plans, even when those plans contradicted the instructions from the day before. Because the alternative was losing the job, and no one wanted to lose this job. By now, the house was growing faster than ever. 40 rooms became 60. 60 became 80. The structure spread across the property like something organic. Corridors branching, rooms layering over rooms, shadows stretching longer as the walls multiplied. The orchards shrank. The house swallowed them. At night, the bell rang. Every night. 2 a.m., 13 chimes. And the men working late swore that after the final chime faded, the house sounded different, quieter, but not empty, like something had arrived, or left, or was moving just out of sight. Sarah never confirmed the séances. She never denied them either. She let the silence do the work. And in that silence, the legend grew, a widow communing with ghosts. A house designed by spirits. A mansion that listened to voices no one else could hear. But whether the séances were supernatural or symbolic, one thing is undeniable. After the séance room became central to Sarah's routine, the house stopped resembling architecture at all. It became something else. A system of confusion. A physical maze designed to disorient. A structure where logic no longer applied. Which brings us to the next stage of the story, the moment the house fully commits to disorientation. Not just strange. Not just eccentric. But deliberately impossible. If you had walked into the Winchester house around the year 1900, you would not have made it 10 feet before something went wrong. Not frightening wrong. Not dramatic. Just wrong. The front entrance. When Sarah bothered to designate a front entrance at all, opened into a hallway that immediately split into 3 identical paths. Same wallpaper. Same lighting. Same narrow wooden floors that creaked under your weight. Pick one, and you felt certain it was correct. Until it wasn't. Some hallways curved so subtly you didn't notice you were turning. You'd keep walking, convinced you were moving deeper into the house, only to suddenly find yourself standing exactly where you started. Other hallways ended without warning. No door. No explanation. Just a wall. Covered in the same wallpaper as the rest of the corridor. As if the house had quietly decided the hallway was no longer necessary. Visitors laughed nervously at first. Then they stopped laughing. Because the longer you stayed inside, the more your sense of direction unraveled. Left and right stopped meaning anything. Rooms repeated themselves. Doors appeared where you were sure none had existed moments before. Even the people who built the house sometimes got lost inside it, and the staircases were worse. One of the most famous rose 4 steps to climb barely 9 feet. Each step was only 2 inches high, so shallow your body didn't register them as real stairs. Climbing it felt like walking in place while slowly ascending. To Sarah, it made sense. Her arthritis made normal staircases painful. The shallow incline was easier on her joints. To everyone else, it felt unreal. Like a staircase designed to exhaust you mentally rather than physically. Another staircase climbed 7 steps, turned at a small landing, and slammed directly into the ceiling. No attic access. No hidden door. Just wood and plaster. The workers had built it, then stopped. Then waited for instructions that never came. So the staircase stayed. Doors multiplied everywhere. Later inventories would estimate nearly 2,000 of them. Some opened into normal rooms. Some opened into walls. Some opened into other doors, so close you could touch the second door without stepping forward. Handle to handle. Wood pressed against wood. One door on the second floor opened to nothing at all. A clean threshold. And then air. 15 feet straight down into the garden below. Brick pavement. No railing. No sign. Why build a door like that? One story claimed it was a trap for spirits. Ghosts, chasing Sarah, would burst through the door and fall. Another said it was simply an unfinished balcony, abandoned and forgotten. Both explanations might be wrong. What matters is that Sarah never removed it. She left it there, like a warning, or a test. Windows created another layer of disorientation. Many faced inward instead of outward. You could stand in one room, look out a window, and see directly into another room across a narrow courtyard. Glass staring into glass. No view of the world beyond the house. Some windows were installed at floor level. You'd walk into a room and nearly trip over a pane of glass set flush with the floorboards, offering a view down into another room below or up into rafters above. It was light without perspective, illumination without escape, and then there was the ballroom. Grand, beautiful, parquet floors, stained glass worth thousands of dollars, 2 pipe organs, space for 100 guests. Sarah loved music. Servants said she played alone at night, her notes echoing through empty corridors. But she never held a ball, never invited guests. The room was built, furnished, admired, and then abandoned. Servants said she walked through it sometimes late at night, trailing her fingers along the walls. But she never played the organs when anyone else was present. The stained glass in the ballroom depicted spiderwebs. Delicate, intricate, beaded with morning dew. Spiders appeared everywhere in the house, carved into woodwork, embedded in tile, woven into iron railings. Sarah believed spiders were good luck, that they trapped evil the way they trapped flies. So she filled her house with them. And slowly, the house itself became a web. Hallways tangled. Rooms layered on top of rooms. Passages twisted until even memory failed. By the turn of the century, the mansion had grown to over 100 rooms, rising 7 stories at its tallest point. It was the largest private residence in California, a structure so massive it rivaled the estates of railroad barons and silver kings. And yet, it felt smaller the deeper you went inside. Compressed, claustrophobic, as if the house wanted you to feel watched. Then, on April 18th, at 12 in the morning, the ground moved. Violently, without warning. The great earthquake ripped through California, magnitude 7.9. San Francisco burned. Buildings collapsed. Thousands died within minutes. San Jose felt it too, and the Winchester house, tall, sprawling, unstable, shuddered like a living thing. Chimneys cracked and toppled. Windows shattered. The 7-story tower groaned, and then fell. Tons of wood and brick crashed downward, punching through floor after floor, until the debris settled in a mountain of splintered beams and glass. Dust filled the hallways. Walls split open, exposing the bones of the house beneath its skin. And inside it, Sarah Winchester was trapped. That moment changed everything. Because the house that had been designed to confuse had finally turned on its creator. The shaking came without warning. April 18, 1906, 5:12 in the morning. Most of California was still asleep when the ground suddenly lurched sideways like a ship hit by a wave. In San Francisco, buildings collapsed almost instantly. Fires erupted across the city. Streets split open. Within minutes, thousands were dead. 60 miles south, in San Jose, the Winchester house felt it too. And the house did not take it quietly. The ground rolled beneath the mansion. Not a sharp jolt, but a deep, sickening motion that made walls sway and floors ripple. Chimneys cracked like dry bones. Windows exploded inward, glass raining across rooms that had never known daylight. Then, the tallest structure on the property, the 7-story tower, began to groan. Witnesses later said the sound was unforgettable. A low, grinding roar as beams twisted under impossible stress. For a moment the tower held, and then it failed. Tons of wood, brick, and iron collapsed inward, crashing through floor after floor. Rooms vanished in seconds. Staircases shattered. Corridors that had taken years to build were erased in moments. Dust filled the air so thick it turned night into blindness. And somewhere inside that collapsing maze was Sarah Winchester. She had been sleeping in one of her many bedrooms. Accounts differ on which one, because Sarah never stayed in the same room for long. That habit, once rumored to be fear of ghosts, would save her life. When the shaking began, Sarah tried to reach the doorway. Standard advice, even then find the frame. Brace yourself. But the door wouldn't open. The house had shifted. The frame had warped, pressed tight against wood like clenched teeth. Sarah pushed, pulled, threw her weight against it. Nothing. She was trapped. Alone in the dark while the building she had spent 40 years shaping tore itself apart around her. Servants heard her calling. They didn't hesitate. They grabbed crowbars and tools and forced their way through debris, choked hallways, walls split open, floors tilted at impossible angles. It took nearly an hour to reach her room. When they finally pried the door open, Sarah emerged shaken, covered in dust, but alive, physically unharmed. Something else was not. In the hours after the earthquake, as aftershocks rippled through the valley, Sarah walked the ruined house in silence. She saw the collapsed tower, the shattered rooms, walls split open like exposed ribs, entire sections of the house reduced to wreckage. The workers waited for orders. They expected rebuilding, restoration, a new tower. After all, rebuilding was what Sarah always did. But this time, she gave different instructions. Seal it off. The entire front section of the house, nearly 30 rooms, was closed permanently. Doors were nailed shut, hallways blocked with furniture and boards, windows covered, passages erased. Sarah never entered those rooms again. She never explained why. But the servants thought they understood. To Sarah, the earthquake wasn't random. It was a message, a warning. She believed she had built something wrong, invited the wrong attention, displeased whatever forces she had spent decades trying to confuse. The collapse wasn't an accident. It was punishment. So she treated it like a wound, sealed, contained, never reopened. And then she started again. But the house was different now. Before the earthquake, the mansion reached upward, towers, grand rooms, vertical ambition. After the quake, it turned inward. New construction stayed low. Hallways grew narrower. Rooms became smaller. Additions sprawled outward instead of climbing toward the sky. As if Sarah no longer trusted height. As if she wanted to stay closer to the ground. She also changed. Before the earthquake, Sarah occasionally interacted with workers. She inspected rooms, left instructions in person, walked the halls openly. After the earthquake, she vanished almost completely. Days passed without anyone seeing her. Instructions arrived through intermediaries. Cash appeared in envelopes. The foreman ran the crews. The housekeeper ran the staff. And Sarah moved like a ghost through her own creation. Neighbors reported strange sights at night. A single candle flame drifting from window to window. Moving slowly, methodically, as if someone were searching for something they had lost. The bell in the séance room still rang at 2 in the morning. Footsteps were still heard in empty halls. But now there was something heavier in the air. A sense that the house had been marked. That the earthquake proved something terrible. That no matter how much Sarah built, no matter how carefully she tried to confuse or appease unseen forces, they were still watching, and now they could shake the earth itself. The Winchester house continued to grow. but it no longer felt like defiance. It felt like retreat. And the people who stayed, the workers who didn't leave after the collapse, did so for reasons that had nothing to do with ghosts. Most people would have walked away. The earthquake had nearly killed their employer. 30 rooms were sealed forever. Hallways collapsed. Towers fell. The house was more confusing and more dangerous than it had ever been. But the workers stayed. Not because they believed in ghosts. Not because they understood Sarah Winchester. They stayed for something far simpler and far more real. Stability. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, work was not a guarantee. It was a gamble. One injury, one illness, one economic panic, and a family could collapse overnight. Sarah Winchester offered something almost unheard of. She paid better than anyone else in the valley. A carpenter who earned $2 a day elsewhere earned $3 at the Winchester estate. Skilled craftsmen earned more, and she paid every week in cash, without delay, no excuses, no missing wages, no quiet theft. In an era when employers routinely docked pay, delayed wages, or vanished entirely, Sarah never missed a payment. She fed them too, not leftovers. Hot meals every day, roasted meat, vegetables, fresh bread, coffee. In summer, lemonade and fruit from the orchards. In winter, thick soup that warmed hands and stomachs alike. For many workers, the meal at the Winchester house was the best food they ate all week. But the real reason they stayed went deeper than money and food. Sarah treated them like people. During the economic panics of the 1890s, banks failed. Construction jobs vanished. Men lined up hoping for work that didn't exist. But the Winchester house never stopped. While other projects shut down, Sarah kept building. Fathers worked there for years, 5, 10, 15. Some brought their sons when the boys were old enough to swing a hammer. Generations worked side by side on staircases that led nowhere and doors that opened into walls. They didn't understand the project, but they understood the paycheck and the security. One carpenter, John Hanson, later told a reporter the Winchester job saved his family. His wife had fallen ill. Medical bills mounted. Other employers would have let him go. Sick families meant missed days, distraction, unreliability. Sarah did the opposite. She quietly increased his pay and told the foreman to excuse him whenever he needed to leave early. No explanation required. Another worker broke his arm and couldn't work for months. Sarah kept him on salary anyway. A laborer's child needed surgery. Sarah paid for it. An elderly maintenance man grew too weak to climb ladders. Instead of firing him, Sarah reassigned him lighter duties and continued his wages. These weren't public acts of charity. No newspapers. No speeches. No plaques. Just quiet decisions written into payroll ledgers. The workers noticed, and they protected her in return. When reporters tried to sneak onto the property, workers turned them away. When neighbors gossiped about midnight bells and strange lights, the men shrugged and kept their opinions to themselves. They built her maze. They followed impossible instructions. And they kept her secrets. Some of them probably thought Sarah was eccentric. Maybe even unwell. But she was their eccentric employer, and she treated them better than anyone else ever had. So when Sarah asked them to build a staircase that went nowhere, they built it. When she asked them to install a door in the floor, they installed it. When she told them to seal off 30 rooms and never speak of what they'd seen inside, they sealed the rooms and stayed silent. By 1910, The house had reached its largest size, over 160 rooms. It was a sprawling, impossible structure that baffled everyone who saw it. But to the men who built it, the Winchester house wasn't a mystery. It was a livelihood, a rare island of certainty in a brutal economy. Sarah Winchester didn't just build a house. She built a system, one that turned inherited violence into wages, skill, and steady work. And for the people inside that system, that mattered more than logic, more than ghosts, more than rumors. The house kept growing, but Sarah herself grew quieter. The newspapers would soon discover her. They would turn her into a spectacle, a caricature, a legend the world thought it wanted to see. And Sarah Winchester would never correct them. This is where the story shifts, from the woman and her workers to the version of her the world invented. By 1910, Sarah Winchester no longer belonged to herself. She belonged to the newspapers. America was obsessed with wealth in the early 20th century, especially strange wealth. Industrialists were building palaces. Railroad barons lived like European royalty. And the public devoured stories about what happened when money met excess. Sarah Winchester was irresistible. A reclusive widow, a vast fortune, a house that made no sense, and rumors of ghosts. The first major article came from the San Francisco Call. The headline painted her not as a person, but as a curiosity, a woman who believed the spirits of those killed by her family's rifles were hunting her. The story described sealed rooms, endless construction, and workers who whispered about bells ringing at 2 in the morning. Other papers followed, and with every retelling, the story grew darker. One paper claimed Sarah wore a veil at all times and never allowed servants to see her face. Another said she ate dinner at a table set for 12 empty chairs reserved for ghosts. A third claimed she had already spent over $5 million on the house, an amount so staggering it sounded fictional, and had no intention of ever stopping. Some of these stories were exaggerations. Some were inventions. Some were half-truths twisted into something monstrous. Sarah Winchester never responded. She never issued corrections, never invited reporters inside, never defended herself. Her silence acted like fuel. Without denial, rumor hardened into fact. The house became proof. The staircase to nowhere wasn't a construction artifact. It was madness. The sealed rooms weren't practical decisions. They were prisons for spirits. The night work wasn't employment, and was terror-driven obsession. And Sarah herself became a caricature. The mad widow, the ghost lady, the woman building to escape death. The public loved it. This was the Gilded Age sliding into the Progressive Era, a time fascinated by extremes, extreme wealth, extreme behavior, extreme consequences. Sarah fit perfectly, but the caricature didn't match reality. Yes, Sarah was reclusive. Yes, she believed in spiritualism. But so did millions of Americans, including scientists, authors, and politicians. Séances were not fringe. They were fashionable, and Sarah was not incoherent. She managed a massive estate. She supervised dozens of workers. She handled complex finances. She ran orchards that produced fruit sold commercially. Payroll records show consistency, not chaos. She was functional, organized, in control. Even the house, when examined closely, had practical explanations. The shallow staircases accommodated severe arthritis. The many bedrooms allowed her to move frequently, a common practice for people in chronic pain. The doors to nowhere were often remnants of changed plans, left in place rather than patched over during constant renovation. Interior windows brought light into corridors that otherwise would have been dark. This wasn't insanity. It was the messy result of building continuously for decades without a fixed master plan. But newspapers didn't want nuance. They wanted a ghost story. And so that's what they sold. Sarah Winchester became less human with every article. Her grief flattened into madness. Her silence became evidence. Her complexity was erased in favor of something easier to digest. The truth was quieter. Sarah was a woman who lost her only child, then her husband. She inherited a fortune tied to violence she never personally committed, but benefited from every day. She fled across the country and built something strange, yes, but also purposeful. She kept people employed. She paid fairly. She gave generously. She created something massive and enduring, and she did it while the world watched from a distance and decided it already knew why. By 1915, Sarah was in her 70s. The construction slowed, not stopped, never stopped, but slowed. The house had reached its peak size, 160 rooms, a sprawling monument to something no one could fully explain. Sarah still walked the halls at night. But she was tired now, and the house that had once felt like defiance, was slowly becoming something else. A place of withdrawal, of preparation, endings.